Hi there, friends. Welcome to Animal Encounters. Today I'm covering some horrific cases of people eaten alive during safari trips. From a tourist who leaned out of the safety of the vehicle for one photo of a lioness, to a boat guide dragged into the mangroves in front of the very people he was steering to safety. But first we start in South Africa, where one man learned the lions only ignored his car but not him. It was February 18th, 2019, and a bright, warm morning had settled over the bushveld of the Kruger area in South Africa, the road ahead shimmering and the grass gold on either side. A self-drive tourist had pulled his small hire car to a stop where a pride of lions lay resting in the shade just off the tar, close enough to see every slow breath. A few other vehicles idled nearby, engines off, everyone doing the one thing that keeps people alive out there, staying inside the car. Joris Kamfuis was a 34-year-old visitor from the Netherlands, on the trip he had saved years for, and had spent the whole morning photographing everything. He had seen dozens of lions by now, always from the car, always calm, and by that point he was treating them with far less caution than the situation ever called for. The pride looked so still and so peaceful that the last barrier between admiration and stupidity simply dissolved, and over a window pillar and a slightly better angle he talked himself into stepping out. Every sign, every rule, every guide says the same thing, that you never get out of your vehicle. The animals of a big reserve have learned to treat a vehicle as one large harmless object, not food and not a threat. Joris wanted a photo without the window frame in it. He opened the door, stepped out onto the road, crouched for the angle, and lifted the camera. Just a man standing on a quiet road in the morning sun. He stepped out of the car for a photo right next to a wild pride. To me, that is not bad luck. That is a man handing himself over to be food. The car had been the only reason the lions ignored him at all. On foot, he was a different shape entirely, no longer part of the vehicle, and to an ambush hunter that can cross open ground in seconds, a standing human is not scenery but opportunity. There was nothing cruel about it, just a wild animal doing the one thing it was built to do. For a moment, nothing happened, and that stillness is probably what killed him, because it felt safe. One of the lionesses lifted her head and locked onto the strange upright shape by the car, and for several long seconds she simply stared, her body lowering and her weight shifting back over her haunches, while Joris adjusted his lens with no idea he had already been chosen. Then she came, low and flat and silent. No roar and no warning, the distance between them gone in a heartbeat. He got out half a step, and one strangled shout, and then the full weight of the lioness hit him, and there was no turning back to the door. No door, nothing but the animal. There was no contest. She hit him at full speed and drove him straight off his feet, her weight slamming him down onto the tar, and her jaws closed over his neck and throat in the same motion, choking off his cry before it began. He got one arm up, and it did nothing. She held him pinned with a low, rolling growl until he went still, and only then did one or two of the others rise and pad warily closer to look. When she was certain, she began dragging him off the road toward the long grass, his body limp in her jaws, while the rest of the pride followed at a wary distance, and the tourists in the nearest cars watched in horror, leaning on their horns, able to do nothing at all. It had taken well under a minute, from his first step onto the tar to the pride closing over him in the long grass. The moment he hit the ground, it was already over. Faster than he could even turn. That type of speed is the part that just makes my spine shiver. Rangers arrived after reports from the motorists who had seen it, but there was nothing to be done for him, and his remains were recovered from the long grass. In a case like this, where a person has climbed out of their vehicle against every rule, the lions are almost never destroyed, because they did nothing a wild lion would not do. The pride was left where it was, and the death was recorded as a lion attack following the victim leaving his vehicle, a phrase the park has written far too many times. Some of them had been photographing the same pride only minutes earlier, never once thinking of the lions as anything but a beautiful sight. South Africa was a man who forgot that the car was the only thing keeping him alive. Our next stop is India, and a river where the danger was not on the road but waiting just under the surface. On a boat trip a tourist had every reason to think was safe. It was November 9th, 2021, and a warm, hazy morning lay over the Chambal River in northern India, the wide brown water winding between pale sandbars and steep earth banks. A small safari boat drifted along the current, its handful of tourists watching for gharial, river dolphins, and the big muggers that bask along the shore. It lulls people into forgetting that the reptiles sunning on the sand are among the most efficient ambush hunters alive. Ellery Griffiths was a 28-year-old traveler from Wales on a boat safari through the Chambal Sanctuary. Camera camera always in hand. She had come a long way to see these animals and wanted the one perfect frame-filling photograph to take home. A large mugger lay hauled out on a sandbar ahead, still as a log in the sun, and the current began to carry the boat gently toward it. Everyone leaned to that side, cameras up. The boatman warned them, as always, to stay low, stay seated, and keep every part of themselves inside the boat, because a guide who lets a tourist onto a chamble sandbar does not stay a guide for long. A basking crocodile looks harmless, almost sleepy. The mugger at the water's edge is never more than one lunge from the river it owns. As the current eased the boat closer than he wanted, and its hull grounded softly on the edge of the bar, the boatman turned to work it back off the sand. In that one distracted second, Ellery simply stepped over the low side, onto the bank. It happened too fast to stop, and by the time he spun round and shouted, she was already several steps away, lining up her shot. She meant to take 2 quick photos and step straight back aboard, the way people always mean to. And the basking mugger ahead of her never moved, which only made it feel safe. She climbed onto a sandbar for a better shot, in a river she was warned was held by big crocs. Now, personally, I could never understand this type of stupidity. Muggers are ambush hunters that strike from the water, not the open sand, exploding out of the shallows in a single lunge. The crocodile basking in plain sight was never really the danger. It was the waterline she was drifting toward, where another one could lie completely hidden, a few feet from her boots, close enough to cover that gap before she could even flinch. She took one photo of the basking mugger, then a second, and edged toward the waterline for a cleaner angle, close enough that the wet sand shifted under her shoes. The crocodile she was photographing never so much as twitched. The one that killed her was a second crocodile she never saw at all, lying just under the surface at the very edge of the shallows, and it came up beneath her in a single explosive lunge, a burst of brown water and muscle, faster than anyone on the boat could shout. Its jaws slammed shut on her leg and hip and took her clean off her feet, and before she could so much as scream, it was already twisting, rolling, dragging her off the sand toward deeper water with terrible, unhurried power. There was no fighting it, no getting a hand free, only that irresistible sideways pull. She was hauled through the shallows into the deeper channel, the water erupting white around her, and then she was under and gone. It had taken only a breath, and the sandbar she had stepped onto was suddenly just churned wet sand and a spreading stain in the shallows. The others screamed, and the boatman lunged across the sand for her, but he was far too late, and the crocodile hauled her off the bar and into the current in a churn of white and brown, spinning her under again and again until the surface simply closed over the place she had stood. It was so fast that some on the boat were still calling her name, not yet grasping that the smooth brown water was all that was left. One lunge from water she thought was empty, and she was gone off the sand. It scares me how little a warning counts that close. The search began at once, but the chambal is wide and quick, and only partial remains were recovered downstream the next day. On a river, with as many crocodiles as the chambal, there is rarely any way to know which individual was responsible. No crocodile was identified, and none was removed, and the death was simply recorded as a crocodile attack after the victim left the boat. The boatman gave his account again and again, always stopping at the same moment the second she stepped onto the sand. She had wanted one photograph to remember the trip by, and in the end, the trip is remembered for her. India was a warning, ignored for the sake of one photograph. Our next story moves to Sri Lanka, where the victim broke no rules she understood and took no risk she could see, and the danger came out of the thick brush she had wandered into for only a moment. It was August 4th, 2017, and a heavy midday heat pressed down on Wilpattu National Park in northwestern Sri Lanka, the scrub forest still and dusty under a white sky. A safari jeep had pulled in at one of the park's designated visitor rest stops, and its passengers had climbed out to stretch their legs. Marit Solheim was a 26-year-old traveler from Norway, near the end of a long day of game viewing, tired, happy, and needing a moment of privacy. The cleared stop was hemmed in by dense, chest-high scrub, the kind of tangled cover that hides everything more than a step or two inside it. She slipped away from the group and pushed a short way into the brush, out of sight, meaning to be gone only a few seconds. What she could not have known was that the scrub she stepped into was ideal sloth bear country. A sloth bear cannot see well and is easily startled, and its whole survival strategy when surprised at close range is to attack first, hard, and immediately. Somewhere in that brush, only a few feet from where she pushed through, one of them was lying up in the shade. It had not registered the jeep or the voices as anything to fear, and did not know she was coming until she was almost on top of it, which is exactly the situation these attacks are made of. She wandered a few steps into thick brush on her own, in a country full of sloth bears. I understand needing a moment, but a few steps out in that area is basically a death sentence. The sloth bear is feared across the South Asian bush not because it hunts people, but because of how it reacts when one appears without warning at close range. It doesn't flee and it doesn't bluff. It rushes straight in, going for the face and head. And at a distance of a few feet in thick cover, there is simply no time to react. The bear came up out of the scrub before she even registered it was there, exploding upward with a sound that was more scream than growl, already on its hind legs and already swinging. There was no space and nowhere to go, just a wall of muscle and claws driving into her, bowling her off her feet as it tore at her head and face with those long curved claws in a frenzy of blows, all of it in less than a heartbeat. She never had the chance to run, to get her arms up, or even to cry out properly, and the wounds those first few seconds left were the kind no one survives without help that was hours away. By the time the noise drove the bear off, she was down and barely conscious. The ground around her churned and dark, and it had all happened in the space of a few seconds before anyone could even reach the edge of the scrub. What little the others glimpsed was a blur of dark fur and the flash of claws, and then it was already breaking away. The group heard the commotion, and the guide shouted and banged hard on the metal of the jeep, and only that noise drove the bear off, sending it crashing back into the scrub as fast as it had come. But by then, it had been on her for whole seconds, and a sloth bear does terrible work in seconds. Her head and face had taken the worst of it, wounds no field kit and no amount of speed could have undone out there. There was no time to run and no time to shout. Just a bear in her face out of nowhere. Once again, the speed of these animals really rattles me. They carried her back to the jeep and raced for help, radioing ahead as they went, but the park was far from any real hospital. The injuries from a sloth bear are so severe and so concentrated on the head that survival often comes down to how quickly a victim can reach a surgeon, and here that was hours away. Marit died on the long journey out. The bear, one of many in that scrub, was never pursued because there was no man-eater to hunt, only a frightened animal that had lashed out at a person who appeared without warning in its resting place and then vanished back into the cover. For her family, the cruelty was in how small the mistake had been. A few steps for a moment of privacy, and how total the price. Sri Lanka was a few steps into the wrong bushes at the worst possible moment. Our next story crosses back to Africa, to the water channels of Botswana, where the threat was not hidden in the brush, but hidden just beneath a calm and beautiful surface. It was May 22nd, 2020, and a still, golden morning had settled over the Okavango Delta in Botswana. The maze of clear channels glassy and quiet between banks of tall papyrus. A local polar stood at the back of a makoro, the slender dugout canoe of the delta, guiding two tourists silently through the reeds. A makoro trip is the classic, gentle way to see the delta, low and slow and quiet. Angus Prendergast was a 43-year-old traveler from Australia, riding low in the front of the makoro, close enough to the water to rest a hand near its surface. The delta at dawn is impossibly peaceful, and it is easy to forget what shares the water with you. The polar knew this channel well, but on a wide, still channel, a submerged animal can be almost impossible to place until it is too close. Somewhere ahead, in a deeper pool, a territorial bull hippo rested with only its eyes and nostrils breaking the surface. A hippo in the water is almost invisible until the last moment, and it guards its stretch of channel with a fury out of all proportion to its lumbering reputation on land. The makoro drifted quietly toward the pool, the people aboard with no idea it was there. The bull had heard them coming, felt the pole and the shadow on the water, and to it the boat was an intruder. They were drifting through calm water in a little canoe. Feet from a hippo they never saw. I would never guess something that big could even hide there. Hippos are among the deadliest large mammals in Africa, behind more human deaths than lions or crocodiles, most of them on the water. A bull will charge a boat, it reads, as an intruder, and a makoro rides only inches above the surface, offering no protection at all. Once one is capsized, the people in it are in the animal's element and entirely at its mercy. The bull came up directly under the canoe with the force of a submerged truck. There was a colossal surge of water and a splintering crack as the little dugout was heaved into the air and flipped, and in a single instant, all three men were tipped out into the churning channel among the reeds. The polar and the second tourist were thrown clear toward the reeds along the bank, but Angus went straight down into the open water, coming up gasping only feet from the animal, in the worst place a person can be. The bull turned on him at once, swinging all of that mass around in the water and coming at him with its huge jaws already gaping wide. There was nothing the others could do but claw their way into the reeds and scream his name. The first bite caught him with a force nothing human could withstand. There was one heavy, wrenching impact and a bloom of red through the brown water, and after it, Angus was simply gone beneath the surface. The bull surfaced once, where he had been, jaws agape and streaming water, then rolled and went down again, and after that, the channel simply went still, the reeds swaying, as if nothing had happened while the other two clung to the bank and screamed into an empty morning. There was no sign of him after that, only the ripples spreading out toward the reeds. The boat flipped in a single second, and there was nothing anyone could do. It's genuinely shocking that a quiet morning drift turned that fast. The survivors reached the bank and raised the alarm, and a search recovered his body from the channel. The cause of death was the massive trauma of the attack together with drowning, the way most fatal hippo encounters on the water end. The hippo, doing only what a territorial bull does in its own water, was not hunted down or destroyed, and the death was recorded as a hippo attack on a mokoro in the delta. They had set out that morning for the gentlest, most peaceful experience the delta offers, and watched it become the worst. Botswana was a peaceful drift that turned in a single heartbeat. Our next story stays in Africa, in the bush camps of Zambia, where the danger did not come from the water but moved silently through the dark, along a path a guest chose to walk alone. It was July 30th, 2016, and a cool, moonless night had fallen over a bush camp in the South Luangwa Valley of Zambia, the dark beyond the lantern, light absolute and full of sound. The camp's chalets were spread along the river, connected by sandy footpaths, and after dark the rule was simple and strict. No lights lined the paths to keep the camp dark for the animals, so once you stepped away from the lanterns you were walking almost blind. Saskia Vogt was a 31-year-old guest from Germany, walking back to her chalet from the dining area late in the evening. Every guest is told, more than once, that after dark you do not walk the paths alone, but wait for an armed escort, no matter how short the walk feels. Saskia was tired, her chalet was close, and she set off down the dark path alone, lit only by her phone. It was the kind of shortcut people take 1,000 times without consequence, right up until the one time the bush is not empty. The camp had a problem that season. An old male leopard, thin and slowed by a badly healed injury to one foreleg that made bringing down fast, healthy game far harder than it once was. He had already been killing goats and dogs in the villages nearby, and had taken to slipping into camp after dark to scavenge the kitchen and refuse pit, growing bolder and less wary of people with every passing week. An aging, injured leopard that can no longer hunt well and has learned to see people and their camps as easy food is exactly the kind of animal that can slip from scavenger to man-eater. The camp had reported it and tightened its rules, escorting each guest to their door after dark. That night, the leopard was somewhere near the path in the darkness, and no one saw what followed. She walked a dark brush path alone when the camp tells every guest to wait for an escort. Truthfully, I am never making that walk by myself. I don't even take the garbage cans down, and I live in the valley. Leopards are silent, patient ambush hunters, pound for pound astonishingly strong, and healthy ones almost never touch a grown human. It is the old and the injured, the ones that can no longer take their usual prey, that turn dangerous once they stop fearing people. To an animal like that, a woman alone, in the dark, lit only by the phone she was staring at, was simply the easiest meal in the camp. What happened on the path itself can only be reconstructed afterward, from the drag marks and the churned sand and the little that was left behind. From the signs, the leopard most likely came from the side in a single silent rush, hitting her low and hard, knocking her off her feet and clamping onto her throat or the back of her neck the way these cats kill, all of it so fast she may never have seen more than a shape in the dark. Whatever the exact sequence, it was over in moments. No one nearby reported hearing any sustained cry, only perhaps one short, cut-off sound that no one placed in time, and then nothing, the path empty, as if she had simply stepped off it and vanished. What the tracks did show was that she had been dragged from where she fell, the marks leading off into the thick brush where a leopard hauls its kill to feed unseen. Whatever fight there was had happened in seconds and in silence, the way it almost always does when a cat this size takes someone from behind in the dark. Only the churned ground and the trail into the brush spoke to how hard and how briefly she had fought. By the time anyone noticed she had not reached her chalet and the alarm went up, she was already gone into the night. She never heard it coming, and by morning it had taken her up into a tree. That type of silence is what scares me the most. They found her at first light, dragged first into thick cover and then partly consumed, some of the remains hauled up into the fork of a tree the way leopards store kill. A leopard that has killed and eaten a person, especially a known problem animal already haunting a camp, cannot be left where people live and sleep. Wildlife officers tracked the leopard and destroyed it, and the death was recorded as a leopard attack on a guest walking alone after dark. Camp had feared exactly this for weeks. and the one rule that might have saved her was the one she had quietly decided just this once she did not need. It is the smallest decisions out there that turn out to carry the whole weight. Zambia was a short walk taken alone against every warning. Our next story returns to the water, to the great rivers of Kenya, and to a man who was not a careless tourist at all, but a guide doing the quiet, ordinary work his camp depended on. It was October 6th, 2019, and the light was going gold and then gray over the Mara River in Kenya, the wide, muddy water sliding past banks trampled by a season of crossings. A safari camp sat back from the river, and as dusk came on, one of its guides walked down toward the water to pull in and tie off the camp's small boat for the night. Camps like his run on many small jobs that happen close to the water. Saitoti Sankale was a 35-year-old Maasai guide who had worked the Mara for years and knew its dangers as well as any man alive. He had warned countless guests about the river and its crocodiles, and he treated the water with the steady, practical caution of someone who had grown up beside it. But the work still had to be done, and as the light failed, he went down to see to the boat, as he had many evenings before, doing a job that had to happen at that hour in the one spot where it could not be avoided. The Mara holds some of the largest Nile crocodiles in Africa. Dawn and dusk are when these crocodiles hunt most actively along the banks, lying motionless in the shallows with nothing showing, waiting for anything that comes to the water's edge. Saitoti crouched at the bank in the last of the light, his back to the darkening water, listening the way men who grew up on that river always do, though a Nile crocodile makes no sound until the instant it strikes. He was at the water's edge at dusk, because it was his job, on a river full of crocs. It's crazy to me that his work puts him there, in that position. The Nile crocodile is the most prolific man-eater of all crocodilians, and the Mara is thick with them. It lies just off the bank, invisible, and explodes forward in the final instant to take its prey in a single grab. A person at the water's edge at dusk, even one who knows the river well, is standing in the exact spot and at the exact hour these animals have evolved to exploit. The take, when it came, was fast and impossibly violent. A huge crocodile came up out of the shallows behind him in a single surge, its jaws closing on his lower body and hauling him off the bank with a force that gave him no chance to rise or call out, and then it rolled, taking him under, and the river folded over the place he had been. There was a short, violent thrashing at the waterline. Water flung silver in the last of the light, and then stillness. If anyone at the camp heard it over the ordinary evening sounds of the bush, no one knew it for what it was. One moment he was crouched at the bank, and the next the bank was simply empty, the water already smoothing over as if he had never been there. Down in the dark, it would have taken him into the spin that drowns and subdues, all of it out of sight and over in under a minute. There was no second chance at the surface, no hand to grab, only a last swirl of disturbed water and the marks in the mud where his feet had been. When Saitoti did not come back, the camp went looking, and torches along the bank found only the marks where he had been. It was a silent grab from the shallows, and then the bank was empty, like nothing had happened. I cannot get over how they give you no time to even react. The search went on for days along the river. In a river that size, with crocodiles that size, a search can take days, and what it turns up varies greatly. Partial remains were recovered downstream several days later, and the death was recorded as a Nile crocodile attack at the water's edge. No single crocodile could be picked out among the many that shared the river, and none was destroyed. The camp had lost one of its own, a man who had kept so many visitors safe, to the one danger on the Mara that no amount of care could ever remove. Kenya was a careful man caught by the one part of his job that could never be made safe. Our final story is the most haunting of all. From the drowned forests of the Sundarbans, where even the guide steering the boat was not beyond the reach of what lives in the mangroves. It was January 27th, 2022, and a cool, misty morning lay over the Sundarbans of West Bengal, India, the vast tangle of tidal channels and mangrove islands hushed and gray at low tide. A narrow safari boat pushed slowly along a channel, its handful of tourists scanning the mud banks and the wall of mangrove for any sign of movement. It is a strange place, half land and half water, where the forest grows straight out of the tide. Sanatan Mandal was a 42-year-old boat guide who had spent his whole life in these channels and knew them better than anyone aboard. He understood, the way most Sundarbans boatmen do, that the tigers here are unlike tigers anywhere else, and ran his trips with hard-earned caution. That morning the tide had carried the boat in close to a mud bank where fresh tiger tracks lay in the gray mud, and while his passengers leaned to photograph them, he moved to push the boat gently back off the shallows. It was a small, ordinary movement, the kind he had made 1,000 times. He had brought hundreds of visitors safely through these channels and had never once been the one in danger. The Sundarbans is one of the world's best-known regions for tiger attacks on people, and its tigers are famous for behaving like nothing else of their kind. They swim the wide channels between islands, come and go with the tides, and are known to take people directly from the banks and even from small boats. The wall of mangrove along the bank was close, dense, and silent, able to hide a tiger at a distance of a few feet. Nothing about it looked dangerous. No shape, no sound, no movement, which in the Sundarbans means nothing at all. He was steering through mangroves he knew better than anyone. But this was tiger country. If even the expert was not safe, I would not have lasted a minute. A Sundarbans tiger is a powerful, water-going ambush predator, and the mangrove hides it perfectly, right to the edge of the channels. It can lie unseen in the roots, a boat length away, and may watch a boat for some time before it launches, with no warning at all. For a man at the side of a low boat, close to the bank, there is no distance and no time. Only the wall of green and whatever is inside it. It came out of the mangrove in a single, silent surge, the water barely breaking. There was a sudden explosion of movement from the tree line, a low blur of orange and black across the mud, and the tiger was on him before anyone on the boat could do more than begin to shout. It took him by the shoulder and neck in one enormous bite, and its weight nearly pulled him straight over the side. For a few desperate seconds, he fought it, half in the boat and half out, clawing at the rail while the others grabbed for him, and then the tiger simply set itself and pulled, tearing him free and hauling him back across the mud toward the roots. He was still moving as the green closed over them, one arm flung back toward the boat, and then the mangrove swallowed them both. It had crossed open mud, taken a grown man off a boat, and vanished back into the trees in the time it takes to breathe, and the water where it had crossed was already going still. The others screamed and jabbed at it with their poles and gunned the engine, but nothing they did could reach him in time, and the tiger dragged him up the bank and into the dense green and was gone. The whole thing over in seconds. It came out of the trees and had him off the boat before anyone understood. That it took the guide right in front of everyone really wrecks me. The others got the boat away and raised the alarm, and forest officials searched the channels in the island, but the mangrove keeps what it takes. In the Sundarbans, a body is very often never recovered, and the tiger responsible melts back into thousands of square miles of forest and is never identified. Sanitan's body was never found, and no tiger was ever caught, and the death was recorded as a tiger attack from the bank. His passengers were brought back without him, and his family was left with the particular grief the Sundarbans hands out so often, a loss with no body and no ending. If these 7 taught me one thing, it is that a safari is a visit to a world that runs by its own rules, where the animals are not scenery and the water and the brush are never truly empty. So tell me which one you would never have believed, and I'll see you next time.